The Lives of the Saints by Father Alban Butler, May 28th, St. Augustine, Bishop, Apostle of England. When Pope St. Gregory the Great realized that the time had come to undertake the evangelization of Anglo-Saxon England, he chose as missionaries 30 or more monks from the monastery of St. Andrew on Hill Coeli. As head of the expedition, he appointed the prior of the monastery, Augustine. St. Gregory must have held him in very high esteem to entrust him with the realization of a project so dear to his heart. The expedition left Rome in 596. When the missionaries arrived in Provence, they heard the first news of the ferocity of the Anglo-Saxons and the dangers that awaited them on the other side of the English Channel. Very disheartened by this, they convinced Augustine to return to Rome to make the pontiff see that it was an impossible adventure. But St. Gregory, for his part, was informed that the English were not hostile to Christianity, so he ordered Augustine to return to join his brethren. The words of encouragement sent to them by the Supreme Pontiff gave courage to the missionaries to go on. The expedition landed on the Isle of Thanet, then ruled by King Ethelbert of Kent. In our February 25th article on St. Ethelbert, we recounted the first meeting in detail. The missionaries came to pay their respects to the king, who received them seated under an oak tree, offered them a house in Canterbury, the ancient church of St. Martin, and gave them permission to preach Christianity to his subjects. Ethelbert was baptized on Pentecost 597. Almost immediately afterwards, St. Augustine went to France, where St. Virgil, the Metropolitan of Arles, consecrated him bishop. At Christmas of the same year, many of Ethelbert's subjects received baptism in Swale, as St. Gregory joyfully recounted in a letter to Eulogius, Patriarch of Alexandria. Augustine sent 2 of his monks, Lawrence and Peter, to Rome to inform the Pope of the events, to ask for more missionaries, and to ask his opinion on various matters. The missionaries returned to England with the pallium for Augustine, accompanied by a new contingent of evangelizers, including St. Melito, St. Justus, and St. Paulinus. Bede writes, "With these ministers of the word, the Pope sent everything necessary for divine service in the church, sacred vessels, altar cloths, images for the churches, vestments for the priests, relics, and also many books." The Pope explained to Augustine how he was to proceed in founding the hierarchy throughout the country and gave both Augustine and Melito very practical instructions about other points. They were not to destroy the pagan temples, but to purify them and employ them as churches. They were to respect local customs as far as possible and to substitute pagan feasts for those of the Christian martyrs and the dedication of churches. St. Gregory wrote, "To reach very high one must advance step by step and not by leaps." St. Augustine rebuilt in Canterbury an ancient church which, together with a log house, formed the first nucleus of the Metropolitan Basilica and the future monastery of Christ Church. Both buildings stood on the present site of the cathedral, which Lanfranc began to build in 1070. Outside the city walls, St. Augustine founded the monastery of St. Peter and St. Paul. After his death, the monastery took the name of St. Augustine's Abbey, and the first archbishops were buried there. The evangelization of Kent was progressing slowly. St. Augustine then began to think of the bishops of the ancient church, who had been driven by the Saxon conquerors into the wilds of Wales and Cornwall. Isolated from the rest of Christendom, the Church retained in those regions some customs that differed from the Roman tradition. St. Augustine invited the principal bishops to meet him at a place on the borders of Wessex, which in Bede's time was still known as Augustine's Oak. There he exhorted them to adopt the customs of the rest of the Western Church and asked them to help him in the task of evangelizing the Anglo-Saxons. To demonstrate his authority, St. Augustine worked a miraculous healing in the presence of the bishops, but they refused to follow the saint's advice out of fidelity to local tradition and out of spite against the conquerors. Later, another meeting was held, which also failed. As Augustine did not rise from his seat when the other bishops arrived, they interpreted his attitude as a lack of humility and refused to listen to him and to recognize him as metropolitan. Unfortunately, according to tradition, St. Augustine then uttered the threat that, if they would not make peace as brothers, war would be made upon them as enemies. Some authors claim that this prophecy was fulfilled 10 years after St. Augustine's death, when King Ethelfert of Northumbria defeated the British at Chester and murdered the monks who had gone to Bangor Escode to pray for victory. The saint spent his last years bent on spreading and consolidating the faith in Ethelbert's reign and instituted the sees of London and Rochester. About 7 years after his arrival in England, St. Augustine went on to receive his heavenly reward around the year 605 on May 26th. In England and Wales, his feast is celebrated on that day, but in the other countries, he is commemorated on May 28th. St. Augustine often wrote to St. Gregory the Great to consult him about all the difficulties he encountered in his ministry. This shows his delicacy of conscience, since in many things in which he could have decided by his own knowledge and prudence, he preferred to consult the Pope and abide by his decisions. On a certain occasion, St. Gregory exhorted St. Augustine to beware of the temptations of pride and vainglory that could assail him because of the miracles that God worked through him. Rejoice with fear and fear with joy that gift that heaven has granted you. You should rejoice, for outward miracles draw Englishmen to inward grace. But you should fear, lest miracles cause you to conceive a great esteem of yourself, for you would thereby transform into vainglory that which should serve to the honor of God. Not all the elect work miracles, and yet their names are written in heaven. The true disciples of truth should only rejoice in the good which all share, and in which they will find endless joy.